This is Behind the Verdict. I'm John Horford with Irene Cook and Christina Capron Horford. I'm working on that. Before we get into this, you guys would not believe some of the things that Irene says off air. I wish that someday we're going to get her to say them on air, but I'm just like, man, it blows me away.
Sometimes the conversations warrant a little more, what's the word I use? Sass.
Sass.
That's it.
There you go. I'm not going to say it anymore. Maggie. So today...
Appreciate you, Maggie. Appreciate you.
Yeah, she'll appreciate you saying that. So today we're going to talk about the George Floyd case. So on May 25th, 2020?
2020.
Yeah, Minneapolis police officers arrested George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, after a convenience store employee called 911 and told police that Mr. Floyd had bought cigarettes with a counterfeit $20 bill. 17 minutes after the first squad car arrived at the scene, Mr. Floyd was unconscious and pinned beneath 3 police officers and showing no signs of life. He died shortly after. George Floyd. You guys remember just where you were? Like, I feel like it's one of those like.
What do you mean where we were? It was COVID. We were home.
Yeah, but where you were?
What, bedroom?
Yeah, sure. What you were wild.
Sorry.
Just like I don't know. I feel like it's one of those cases that everybody knows about George Floyd.
Absolutely.
You know?
But one of the reasons everybody knows about it is this is one of those cases that is contrary to what happens in most of them, which is there were multiple people filming this on their cell phones as this was going down in Minneapolis that day.
Yeah.
Right? So when law enforcement got the call to go out there, it wasn't just that he had paid with a $20 counterfeit bill. The clerk said that this person was very intoxicated. I don't know how they worded it, but was very intoxicated, disorderly, and other things. So should they be a little heightened, law enforcement, to look for this? Sure. But the video that I saw right from the beginning was a little concerning because they go right away up to the window, and it's shortly thereafter guns are drawn. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, what was the point for that? Do you remember what they said the point was for drawing the weapons that early on?
I think that he was a large guy. Like, he was a big guy. And he's a black guy, and they thought he was on drugs, and I think they were just afraid. But there's 3 of them, correct?
At first, there were only 2 of them.
Okay.
And then another squad car shows up, and then another squad car shows up with 2 people.
Because they were trying to get him into the police car at first, and he wasn't necessarily going.
You didn't want to go in, he was claustrophobic.
Yeah, or something, some strange situation. It could be drug related. It could be like a part of me also always thought maybe he genuinely thought he was paying with a $20 bill and that someone had just giving him a fake $20 bill.
That could be, but I think Christina was right. He did say that he was claustrophobic, and I'm not at all standing up for what was done in this case, but he was sitting in a car. That didn't make him claustrophobic, but sitting in the back seat of a police car would?
Being handcuffed and then put into the back of a car with like a cage in it.
Hey, I'm just throwing this out there.
That feels a little different to me.
I'm just throwing it out.
Yeah, it
just
feels
throwing
a little
it out
different.
there.
Yeah.
Don't yell at me.
I'm not a yeller, if you can tell.
You just talk over me, but that's okay.
You talk over me all the time.
That's my job.
Fair enough. You win. You always win. And I'm not gonna argue with that.
But in this case, here's my next question though: why did they call for so much backup?
Because he was a large black guy who was on drugs and that they were afraid of.
That's what I think. Don't we have another hotline or another number we can call now that are like for people who are maybe tripping on drugs and just need like some talking down and not maybe like the escalation of police and guns? Like,
but was that around before or after this?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like this is a perfect scenario that like maybe someone just like leveling with him and like calming him down could have saved his life, instead of like someone because he probably has bad experiences with cops. He has had bad experiences with cops.
Yeah, but in this case, it's one of those situations where do you even need to go that far? Or if the police officers reacted in a reasonable way, would that have been enough to de-escalate the situation? Because very clearly, like, he's handcuffed. There's multiple people there. he's saying he can't breathe, but then he's talking, and then there's that whole idea that people believe, like, oh, well, if you can talk, you can breathe. Clearly something killed him.
For now.
And he was saying he couldn't breathe. And then he started begging for his mom and like...
Well, you know, before you even get to that point, so the first law enforcement officers on scene get him out of the car. They cuff him. At one point, they set him down. I think it was on the sidewalk or up against the building, something like that first. And then they're trying to put him into the squad car. Second squad car rolls up. Third squad car rolls up with Chauvin and his partner, right? And I can't remember if they had Floyd all the way in the back seat of the one car, but what I recalled from reviewing it recently was that Chauvin went to the other side door. So let's say they're trying to put him in the back passenger side. Chauvin went to the driver's back passenger,
Driver's side, yeah,
and pulled him through. Why would you do that part? What was the purpose for that?
To get him in.
He was already in.
To get him in more.
Pulled him all the way through.
But I don't think he was in. I don't think they could close the door.
Right, but why would you pull him all the way out the other side if your intent was to leave him in the car?
Oh, you're saying he wasn't trying to pull him more into the car and close the door. He was trying to just pull him out the other side?
No, but that's what happened. He pulled him out the other side. That's how he ended up on the driver's side right next to the squad car, because he got pulled out from the back seat.
I mean, clearly he lost his temper. He lost his composure in that situation and was going to make an example of George.
But, you know, this is a circumstance where this guy paid with a counterfeit bill at most.
20.
No, a bill.
Yeah.
Right. But my point is, at most, it's a 5-year felony. I don't know for sure what the Minnesota laws
for
were.
$20?
If you have a counterfeit bill.
Yeah, but it's...
Passing a counterfeit bill can be up to a 5-year felony.
Yeah, up to.
Up to. I'm not saying you'll get that much. We've talked about that. But that's what it was. So why did it escalate so much for something
so small?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the question.
It wasn't like he bought a car. He had like $30,000 in fake cash, like $20.
You know, this was a case where there were, I think, at least 2 people filming, yelling at police to get off him, to do different things. I don't remember if there were more than 2, but I remember seeing 2 separate videos of this. And at one point, there's a still shot out there on the internet where Chauvin is kneeling on or near his neck. There's another officer kneeling on or near his waist, and another officer kneeling on or near his backs of his knees. Do you guys remember seeing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What were your thoughts when you saw that?
It seems like overkill, and he was handcuffed.
He was handcuffed behind his back.
Yeah. So what's he gonna do? Like roll away? Like I don't understand.
And they said it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds was the time frame that at least Chauvin was kneeling on him. Mm-hmm. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And how many times did he say, "I can't breathe"?
A ton.
Do you remember what else he was saying?
He was crying for his mom.
So what were they waiting for?
But that's why I said I think he lost his composure, and he was just trying to like make an example of the guy. And I think I genuinely believe that he thought that George was over-exaggerating. Like, you're talking, I can hear you, you're not shutting up. Like,
yeah, but at one point, George is like unconscious and he's still on his back for how much longer?
That's towards the end.
I know,
right?
but still, even a minute longer.
I'm with you. So why did they have trouble proving the cause of death?
From what I can recall and what I reviewed recently, he also had some controlled substances in his system. I want to say, I can't remember if it was methamphetamine or fentanyl, but it was something that was pretty heavy duty in his system to some degree. And so they had to try to figure out, well, let me say it this way. So when you look at a death case, you have to look for a couple different things. You have to look for the cause of death. Was it strangulation? Was it a gunshot? Was it a stab wound? Was it asphyxiation? And then you have to look at the manner of death. Was the manner natural? Was it accidental? Was it homicide? And so they have to look at all of those things. But when you have somebody who also has, maybe there were some medical issues that were behind that may have been exacerbated, like a racing heart could have gone to a heart attack. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but that could be an example of someone using controlled substances.
Yeah.
You have to look, is that a contributory factor on what it was? Or was it another factor all all on its own.
Right.
There's a few things that are coming up. Saying that the county's medical examiner said listed fentanyl intoxication and recent methamphetamine use as other significant conditions related to his death, but did not state the drugs caused his death. Instead, they concluded that Floyd died of cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement, subdual, restraint, and neck compression. So, and then they got a pulmonary specialist in this case that stated a healthy person subjected to the same restraint would have died. So I guess his death was determined to be asphyxia due to police restraint.
You know, and I think this case really divided the nation to some degree. Some people were saying, you know, law enforcement was clearly out of line and inappropriate, obviously. And other people were saying they had to do what they had to do to, you know,
he should have complied.
Subdue the person, and he should have complied, right? But this case spurred not just resentment towards police, it spurred a lot of rioting, didn't it?
It did. I'm glad we brought up the rioting because the riots were proven to have been started by white supremacists who were intentionally trying to incite a second civil war.
Well, you know, rioting in any way is never a good option.
Agreed.
Right? Peaceful protest, fine.
Yes.
Right? But rioting, looting, and, you know, we've seen cases over the years where Rodney King, for example, when that case came through, there was so much rioting and so much looting and destruction of property in LA when that was happening. I want people to stand up for what they believe in, but that doesn't mean you can be lawless either, right?
It's true, but I mean, it's historically it's gone. I mean, I guess it just it depends sometimes.
You think rioting is okay?
I think that it is an absolute last resort. And I think that rioting in the way that it was done, where people are like just turning it into an excuse. One, the rioting was started intentionally by white supremacists, and that was proven in federal court.
In George Floyd's case.
Okay. In George Floyd's case. Because they wanted to be able to like push that type of narrative. Unfortunately, people bought into it and just kind of went along with it. And then there are videos of people running out of stores with like TVs and Xboxes and, you know, all these types of things. And it looks bad. Like that type of situation, like I don't know how to justify a situation like that.
I don't think you can justify that. I think, like I said, peaceful protesting and doing that kind of thing is fine. But going above and beyond and using a circumstance like this case to loot and to cause damage is another thing.
Agreed. I'm trying to think of a circumstance where.
I was just going to say I agree with you, peaceful protest, but I also agree with what you said. It's like, it's the absolute last resort. But like, how crucified did Colin Kaepernick get for kneeling during the national anthem as a protest? Lost his job. You know what I mean? The same causes.
He got blacklisted. Yeah, he got blacklisted
so it's
from
like,
the NFL.
I'm not a black person, but I understand the rage at some point. But I also know that a lot of it, like, wasn't Kyle
Rittenhouse?
Wasn't he like there to stir up more with a?
I mean, he shot multiple people in Kenosha.
So it's just proof that
and
those type of people were there.
And he signs people's guns now at like gun shows.
The fact that he's not in jail is crazy.
I mean, George Zimmerman should be in jail too.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't know. But again, to go back, I can't think of a circumstance necessarily unless there was like an institution maybe that was committing like grave injustice against somebody. I can think of a type of riot. I think what John Brown did in the 1800s was right.
I don't
know. The Harper's Ferry raid.
Sorry.
So John Brown was an abolitionist and staunchly against. I think he even had I think his wife was black. He's a white guy. Staunchly against, obviously, the institution of slavery. So he decided that he was going to get a group of people together that were also against slavery, black, white, go to Harper's Ferry, get weapons, go plantation to plantation, and basically just like liberate as many enslaved people as he can and arm them along the way, so they could sort of just kind of like, this is how we're going to end slavery.
Yeah.
And how did that work out?
He got hung. He got killed. But
do you think it progressed the cause?
100% it did.
Yeah.
100%. People still talk about it today.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you fast forward, sometime in history and look at the civil rights movement, what did Martin Luther King recommend? Peaceful protesting.
Still got killed.
So, but Martin Luther King also acknowledged that you needed the other people too. He said you need those people who are willing to go in and do some of the dirty work. Sometimes you need some of the people in the South that aren't necessarily the subservient black people who are like, yes, sir.
But he
like,
didn't advocate rioting.
Not necessarily, but he advocated being armed and not always backing down to the white people in the South. And he said that both sides were needed.
Standing up for what you believe in, which is what I think he was going for, I think is right. Standing
With
your ground.
guns.
Standing your ground.
With
right?
guns.
But not rioting, breaking store windows and looting.
Stealing. The looting thing, I'm with you. The looting and all, and I told you, like I can't justify like the looting itself. Like
it's a shame because
hard.
It takes away from the actual
it takes away,
message.
It does.
It does. And in this case, it made everybody think that people just started the riots so they could steal stuff.
Right.
Versus the riots were started by people who wanted primarily, well, I mean, it wasn't only people of color, obviously, but wanted that perception that people of color were just going to go through, use this as an excuse to loot, and then use that as justification for, inciting a race war. Mm-hmm. Which sounds crazy to say, but that's literally what happened.
Well, but it's not that crazy because historically we've seen people commit crimes to try to incite race wars, like Manson, if you remember. That was what he was trying to do.
Helter Skelter.
Yeah. People listen to that and they believe that and they think that's a way or a route to get what they want, regardless of how it may hurt somebody.
Yeah.
But I do think in this case, Chauvin was the law enforcement officer who was kneeling on the neck, and he was tried. He was convicted by a jury, and I think he was sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison. Does that sound right?
I thought it was over 20, I believe.
I think it's 22 and a half.
How long did that jury deliberate? Do you remember?
I don't remember that. It
seems like
they were deliberating for a while because it seemed like everybody was on pins and needles waiting for the verdict to come in.
I can't remember, yeah.
And I think a lot of times juries will, even if they think they have an idea of what they want to do right from the beginning, they want to make sure they are following the rules. They go back and look at those instructions. They get a written copy of it. And they want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. So while maybe you, juror number one, going back to some other episodes, may have looked at parts A, B, and C, juror number two may have looked at X, Y, and Z, and so on. And so it's really important for everybody's individualized opinion as a juror to be able to be discussed. Because it might make you feel better about your decision if you're on the fence or someone else.
Right.
Yep. 10 hours.
10 hours?
Around 10 hours.
Is that fast?
2 days.
It's not that lengthy. I mean, I've had homicide cases come back in 26 minutes. I've had homicide cases come back in a day and a half. So it just...
But isn't that... There were multiple charges, too, so then you're trying to deliberate.
There are multiple charges, and you have to look at every element for each charge to prove it. So, for example, in Michigan, if I were trying to prove first-degree premeditated murder, I'd have to prove that the suspect caused the death of the victim, that they did so with premeditation and or deliberation, and then there are definitions for those. And then you have to show that there was nothing that excused that death as far as a mitigating factor or something that might reduce it to a lower level. So when you have multiple charges, that jury had to go through each of those charges and look for every single element to see if those elements were met. That's a lot to do. So 10 hours really isn't that long because I think they had, 4 or 5 charges?
Yeah, it's second-degree murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, and then a violation of federal civil rights. So, yeah. I mean, I guess we could talk about some of those charges and what they actually mean.
So it's interesting that they had that many choices on the murder. A lot of times you'll have the highest one. Again, for example, in Michigan, if you have a first-degree murder case, it'll be first degree. The defense will generally always ask for what we call a lesser included offense, so like a step down, which could be second-degree murder, or they may ask for manslaughter. So the penalties on those in Michigan would be first-degree murder is a life offense without parole. Murder in the second degree is life for any number of years, but you could get parole. And manslaughter is up to 15 years imprisonment. So under those circumstances, they look like different degrees as options. And a lot of times people think they're convicted of all of them. They may not necessarily be that way. So, for example, in Michigan, I had a case where the guy was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder, but also convicted of felony murder, which is a different type, because he committed a felony at the time, which was kidnapping. Okay, so you have 2 murder convictions, but in Michigan, you only get 1 because it's based on the same behavior, the same crime. And so under those circumstances, even though the jury convicted of everything, it was entered as 1 first-degree murder, so you got life without parole. So under those cases, when you look, it's like murder in the third degree, murder in the second degree, I think manslaughter or something else.
Second-degree manslaughter, and then the violation of federal civil rights.
So that one's separate because that's a federal charge. Because I think there was a separate federal sentence for that at 21 and a half years.
Yeah, it says Chauvin pleaded guilty to depriving Floyd of his constitutional rights while acting under color of law, leading to Floyd's death and bodily injury.
Right, so that's federal, but the state charges, all the murder ones, could be the lesser included offenses. And then you don't get all of them. They're not consecutive. So if one is a 10-year and one is a 15-year and one is a 20, you don't get 10 stacked on top of 15, stacked on top of 20. They're generally concurrent, meaning at the same time.
Gotcha. If this hadn't been recorded, does Derek Chauvin go to prison?
I think it'd be a lot harder because who's seeing it? You have eyewitnesses, and it depends on how detailed the eyewitnesses are.
In your opinion?
I think it's a possibility, but I think it's a higher possibility because of the videos.
Gotcha. So you think if people hadn't been recording?
I mean, I could tell you a story about somebody out on the street right now outside of the studio, and they are pulled over and they're pulled to the ground, and they say they can't breathe, but the cop is holding them down. And that's all I say. The cop is holding them down versus that video.
The knee on the neck.
The knee on the neck is different than just being held down.
And then him begging and pleading and
it depends on, in the first scenario, the person could say, well, I saw the suspect calling out or asking for something or talking to police. Well, yeah, he was talking, but is it different than that? Mm-hmm. So it really depends. I think the video probably in that case made the trial a lot different than it would have been without the videos.
Yeah.
For sure.
Now, I don't want to negate the eyewitness testimony because I'm sure that was very good too. But again, it depends on what everybody focused on.
Right, exactly. You wouldn't have all the details and...
You might have details, but they might be different.
Not all
you
of
might
them,
not
though.
have everything.
Yeah.
They might have focused on one part and they got so emotional on the one part they focused on, they might not have seen everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think, so there's another case in Minnesota a few years before George that I always think about because I remember seeing the video for the first time and I was just like, wow. Do you remember the case of Philando Castile?
Vaguely.
So it happened in 2016. It was a traffic stop. Officer pulls him over. You can look up the video. He's like super chill. He's like, I just want to let you know, like, and he lets him know that like he has a firearm on him and all that stuff. And like as soon as he says that, the officer like freaks out and shoots him and kills him. Like he wasn't reaching for his firearm. He was very calm. Like, and the officer got off. I think. I'm pretty sure he got off. One sec, I gotta look it up. I'm pretty sure he got off, but I feel like cases like that and someone getting away help to make it harder for like a case like George Floyd in the future for that to slide. In my opinion, it just feels like public perception having an influence on the decisions being made by a jury, whether they want to admit it or not. I feel like it plays a part, like how many can we let go before we have to, make an example of somebody?
Make an example or hold someone accountable finally.
But on the flip side
Both.
of that, cases like that do, based on statistics, are rare, right? They don't happen every day, but they're the ones you hear about every day.
Yes.
You may not hear about the ones where the person did attack the officer and the officer was in fear of their life. And, let's be honest, I wouldn't want to be a police officer because there are so many things that can happen. You go to work every day not knowing for sure if you're going to come home to your family or not knowing what could happen or not. Mm-hmm. And it's a very scary situation. That being said, they have a huge responsibility to do the right thing, to follow the law, to ensure not only their safety, but the safety of the people they're dealing with. That's a lot to deal with. And do you think there is, a rate of human error in there? Like you're doing everything you can, and in that split second, even with all the training that you have, do you do the right thing? Do you do maybe not the right thing? Do you do the incredibly wrong thing?
Very
difficult job.
It is.
Very difficult job.
Do you think they could improve training in handling those moments between do I escalate this or de-escalate this?
You have to put more money in to the system.
But I do think they have a lot of training on that. They have a lot of less than lethal choices that they can use. So for, years ago, not everybody carried a taser. They all have tasers now. So that is a less than lethal choice if you have to do that versus, pulling your firearm and shooting somebody.
Yeah.
Right. So there are choices there. There are a lot of training and education for law enforcement officers about de-escalation. That's one of the biggest things that they have to have ongoing legal training for is de-escalation. But again, I think, you're coming down to, is it my life or theirs? That's a really hard position, a fine line to walk.
It is, but I feel like sometimes it can be easy to just, police have more protection because of the situations they're in. Sorry, I'm stumbling, but I just think they can use that as any excuse. You know what I mean? I was in fear for my life, and maybe there was a lot of steps they could have taken before they pulled a gun.
Maybe in some cases.
I don't know.
But I do want to say this for law enforcement. I've worked with law enforcement for 25 years. I've honestly, never seen law enforcement go to the point where some of these cases that we've talked about are. I've never seen them to a point where they did the wrong thing. They did everything they could up to then. They de-escalated. They tried, physical restraint, just holding them down, not on their neck, but, other types of things. And I've seen several cases where cops were hurt badly as a result of defendants going after them while they were just doing their job. Mm-hmm. And so, we have to keep that in mind too.
So in Allegan, you've never seen cops take it to this level?
No. I also worked for a few years in the city of Flint, and I didn't see it there either.
Oh, did you?
I did.
And you didn't see it in the city of Flint?
I didn't.
Really?
Law enforcement did everything they could to de-escalate. And I had been involved, not myself personally, but in reviewing several officer-involved shootings, and you have to look at what happened, what led up to it, what other options there were, what did the suspect do or not do that may have contributed to escalation. Was there anything else that could have been done? You have to look at all of those things. But there were a couple cases that I dealt with where I can think of one in particular where law enforcement was knocked out by the suspect from punching him in the temple. And the cop went straight backwards down and was knocked out and was in rehabilitative hospitals for a very long time, learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to do all those things again. And he really thought that was it. His life was over. And he wasn't, I don't even think he was that old yet. And he didn't do anything wrong. He had a partner there. They did all the right things. It was on body cam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, like you're saying, these aren't the cases necessarily that are happening every single day, but they clearly do happen.
They do happen, but I also think that a lot more law enforcement across the nation, and I can say this for certain in Michigan, have dash cameras on their cars now, have body cameras on that can record the whole thing, so you don't need the Joe and Jane Citizen, for lack of better names, recording with their cell phones, the body cameras will be able to tell that whole perspective. And sometimes that's a better perspective because you're getting it right from the officer's viewpoint. This is what they saw before it escalated.
Yeah.
And I think that can be very helpful.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, it'd be interesting to see statistics. And I know there are a lot of people who are probably upset because they believe that there's genuine corruption and racism, which of course there's a level of racism, in one way or another, or sexism or whatever in any type of field, and bias in general. But for the most part, people are trying to do the right thing.
They're trying to do the right thing for the right reason and make sure people go home safe, whether you are the cop, the victim, or the suspect. They're trying to make sure people go home safe.
Yeah. I actually, after this, there was a group that was started in Grand Ledge United. The chief at the time, I don't know if whatever, it's public, you can look it up. Chief O, good guy, really good guy. We would go around and just like have these conversations and these talks, and him and I used to talk all the time about this, and we would be in the community and just, having these conversations with, groups. And I mean, he would admit to a level of, racism, and he would also talk about a level of incompetence sometimes amongst police officers, but it wasn't necessarily because people were intentionally trying to do the wrong things. I feel like he would typically say it had more to do with not being able to be competitive. So needing officers, but not always being able to get the best officers, even though he was very happy with like the officers that he had in Grand Ledge. Just because you're not able to, you lose people all the time. Like I remember at the time he was like, yeah, I'm moving some of my people to Grand Rapids, to Lansing. They can just offer more. I don't have enough money to pay these people.
Well, and that's part of the problem. If bigger municipalities or bigger agencies, whatever it may be, can offer more money, better benefits, better time off, whatever it may be, your best of the best officers, or for any business for that matter, your best of the best teachers, lawyers, prosecutors, whatever, are going to go where they are valued and get more for what they're doing. The problem is we still need officers in those areas that maybe can't afford the best, that maybe don't have enough resources, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I actually sat in on some of the hirings that they would do, like on the committee, and there were people who would come in that it's like, if this person ever becomes a police officer, you should be terrified. Seriously. Like, I'm sitting there, like, I have a whole rubric that they give me, and like, I'm trying to keep like a straight face, but there are people who came in there, and it's like, why are you here? And it's like, I'm so sick of people, talking crap about police, like, let me in here. And he's like, we're going to put them in their place. Like, I'm with you, brothers. Like, and I'm just like, and like,
Dismissed.
They do such a good job of like staying composed, and then they would leave the room, and they were like, we will never hire an individual like that ever. But some police department like probably will, is like, and that's the type of person that gives, our profession a bad name.
So what you're saying is, off the record, they said more and were sassier.
Just like you.
Yeah.
Just like you.
Just wanted to make sure we made that connection.
They're so smart, but it's a podcast and we're supposed to keep people engaged and entertained. So you got to give them something. I throw out the minor things, There's someone probably screaming at their computer, phone, car, like, well, what about Breonna Taylor? What about Tamir Rice? These cases where cops so blatantly, bypassed any rational protocols and killed a child on a playground in Cleveland, or, shot up an apartment in Louisville. Like,
there are circumstances where they are absolutely, positively, 100%. They make the wrong choice, the wrong decision. I mean, that's so understating, and it's not even appropriate. I don't know how to make that. They did the wrong thing, absolutely, but that's not the general majority of law enforcement.
But how are they not always held accountable in those circumstances?
Unless I can analyze each one of those cases, it's really hard to say, do I think they should be held accountable when they do things like that? Yes, I do. Yeah. Absolutely. So, don't yell at me when you listen to this. I do believe in that. But I also think, just like any other case, one bad apple can give the majority a really bad name. And I think sometimes that happens too.
And I think that's the frustration a lot of people have with law enforcement. It's that if you know there are people within your ranks who are more likely to commit these types of crimes because of the type of individual that they are, why would you allow them to stay in your ranks? Or why do you just move them from, like a few episodes ago, we talked about the people in the Gabby Patino case that
they got jobs somewhere else.
They got jobs somewhere else. They just moved them somewhere else.
Do you hear me?
Well,
so they got jobs at Canton PD.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
They didn't move him somewhere else. That person was let go from that agency in, where was it, Wyoming or whatever it was?
Yeah.
Right? And they went to another agency. So they didn't move him there, but that other agency might have been a circumstance where they were desperate for experienced officers.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that's right.
Yeah.
But I think that may happen more often than not.
Yeah. Well, and I guess one of the issues and one of the debates that I remember having a lot, especially when I was running for office, was just like, it's like, well, would you defund the police? You know, is that the answer? And I would always say, if your goal is genuinely to have better public protection, I would say you have to do the opposite with more accountability put into place. They need more training. They need higher pay. They need great benefits, because you want to attract the best people you humanly possibly can into these positions. With that should come a level of accountability and responsibility. From what I remember in the state of Michigan, police sort of get to judge themselves. Correct? Like, police are judged by police when it comes to misconduct. Is it?
So for internal investigations, they're not judged by their own agency. It's usually at least 2 counties or 2 areas away. So it's not,
But it's still police.
Somebody from another area.
But it's still police judging police.
It is for internal investigations.
Yes.
But that does not mean police choose whether or not charges are filed. That's the prosecutor's office.
Yeah.
Each and every time, that's the prosecutor's office.
But should there be a third party involved in that step? And this was just a conversation that just used to come up a decent amount, just because the time when I was running and what was popular.
Yeah, but who would that third party be?
I don't know.
And how would they know what the right thing is unless they know the laws and the rules and the regulations of being an officer, and what are the rules for that specific agency, and what they did? Was it reasonable under a reasonable officer standard? Then you need an officer to say that. Just like if you were going to have a medical malpractice case, are you going to have a teacher check to see whether that doctor did the right thing or not? No, you're going to have another doctor analyze what they did to see if that was the right thing or not.
Yeah.
Right? So,
but a doctor that works for like a third party, independent.
But that's why they get different agencies to come in and do it. But they're still law enforcement, so it's still the same scenario.
Yeah, and I think that was the complaint that a lot of people had, was just like, it's like law enforcement looking out for law enforcement. It's like, don't worry, I got you. Like,
sometimes I'm sure
that's how they felt, and of course it's not always that way.
It's not.
Of course it's not. But I think the frustration that a lot of people have, I know one of my sisters is listening to this, and she definitely has major frustrations related to this, is that they don't think that they're being held to the standard they should be held to in terms of accountability for their actions. So I guess that it's difficult.
But one thing to remember for law enforcement, so not only is there an investigation criminally to see if they should be charged criminally, there's an internal investigation to see if they violated rules and regulations of the agency. So let's say, for example, you did something really bad and the prosecutor picks it up from the investigators and says, yep, I'm going to charge you. Then on top of that, you can still have the internal investigation and lose your job regardless of what happens with that criminal case. So you can have 2 different sanctions and 2 different investigations that go on simultaneously and have 2 different consequences as a result. You did make the comment about, some people talked really heavily about defunding the police, and I've never seen that as an option, because all you're going to get is lawlessness. Wasn't there somewhere, I want to say it was Washington State, some town out there somewhere that actually did defund the police? Do you remember this?
And Minneapolis tried to as well, I believe.
But there was a town, and I can't remember, somewhere out west that did.
And they went right back to it.
They went right back to it because they realized it was like the old Wild West, for lack of a better phrase. People did what they want regardless of what the laws were, and it was worse than it was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can we always improve a situation? Yes. Can we improve agencies and behavior, whether it's teaching or prosecutors or law enforcement, doctors, whatever? I think with better training, with more money and education and all the things, everybody can improve.
And with better communication. I remember one of the things that was coming up when me and the chief were going around and having these conversations in the community, and we did it for like 2 years, was not defunding the police, but people were calling for like a reallocation of funding, because they're like, well, you know, this department shouldn't have gotten these two like that's such a waste of money for them to get these two like Humvees and for them to deck them out and all of that.
For this.
And he had an answer for it too. Well, I don't know. Their answers might be different. He had said, like, in the case that they were citing specifically, that the federal government actually had given them those vehicles, and it wasn't something that they were necessarily spending their budget on.
Yeah. And people often think that's what they're doing, but they're getting it from federal vehicles that are no longer in use or that are being deactivated for some degree or for some reason.
Okay, so it's the same answer.
Yeah,
Yep.
It is.
Yeah.
But they're not spending the money on it, but it does help local law enforcement when they need it to.
Yeah, and I guess people were just worried that it would be used. Like, why would you need a mini tank? You know.
Well, I did a homicide case once where the suspect barricaded himself in the house with what we thought was still the alive victim. Wouldn't come out, was threatening to shoot everybody, actually fired at police. And so they went in, they went up to the residence with kind of a mini tank to see if they could see if the victim was alive or not.
Yeah.
And it was like a 9-10 hour standoff. And when the suspect finally gave himself up, he had killed the victim hours ago, just kept police at bay.
Oh, wow.
After he shot 2 cops and the victim.
And that was in Allegan?
No, that was, that wasn't Allegan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That was my first homicide case I ever did. And I remember the facts like it was yesterday.
Yeah, that's a crazy first case.
Well, it wasn't the very first case, but it was my first
homicide case. Yeah. Christina, you good?
Yeah, I was just looking up because you're just talking about whether defunding the police, but I was talking about like the mental health services earlier, like having another option to call, because I was thinking of the case of Elijah McClain. Do you remember hearing about that in 2020?
Remind me.
He's autistic.
Oh yeah, and he was with the guy.
He was I think having an episode, or I don't know the proper term, but he was not mentally okay and was freaking out, but he was walking home with a face mask on because he was anemic, and they ended up killing him with ketamine or sedative, the paramedics, to sedate him, and it killed him.
No, I wasn't thinking about that one.
There are a lot of agencies that have what they call crisis response teams. So if someone is actively suicidal but threatening others or threatening harm to themselves, there are some agencies that have these crisis response teams that have mental health personnel embedded in the team.
Yeah.
So they can go out there, and so they're not going to arrest, but maybe they're going to do an involuntary petition for a psychiatric hold to make sure they're okay. Or if they need help, they get the services they need. So there are those. But again, that comes down to funding.
Yes, of course.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Yeah. No, it definitely, it matters. I mean, if you want better services, you have to have increased funding. So, I mean, I guess that could be reallocation of wealth if there really is mismanagement of that funding. But in how many cases is there genuine mismanagement to where serious funds could be reallocated? I don't know. I guess you'd have to go department by department and make that determination for yourself. But to bring it back to George Floyd real quick and then to wrap up, we had talked about, not in this episode, but before the episode had started, the perception that because George had, some criminal activity in his past and some, obviously he was on drugs when that happened and he had drug charges in his past, that he sort of deserved that ending. You had made a point that, seems obvious to some people, but not to everybody. But just because he has that, one, they didn't know at the time necessarily that he had that history, but two, that should have had nothing to do with how police reacted to that specific circumstance.
Right. I think going in, I don't think they knew his name, so they wouldn't have been able to run him to know he did have a violent history. He had robbery and some other.
Did him and Derek know each other? Had they had previous confrontations with each other? I couldn't remember if that was true or if that was just something that people had said. I
don't
can't
recall
remember
if they did, but I mean, he did have a past. That being said, that does not mean he deserved to have happened what happened, right? If somebody is violent with the police and they need to be held down, that's one thing. But, from the video, it was hard to see. It didn't seem like he was being violent. Was he resisting? Sure. Was he not wanting to get in the car? Yes. But does that mean he should have had what happened to him happen? No, yeah. Absolutely not.
I think that's an important distinction that you made. Like semi-resisting, but not necessarily in a violent manner.
Right.
Like it was more in a panicked, like afraid manner, not I'm trying to intentionally hurt you way. And you would hope that law enforcement officers would be able to distinguish between the two, especially when there are several officers. It's different if it's like a one-on-one or something like that.
One-on-one, I think, could be pretty scary if you're that officer, right?
And he was a lot bigger than them.
But I think there were, 4? 1, 2, 3, 5.
Was there 5? Yeah,
I think there were 2 initially, and then 1 showed up, and then
3
2
got
more.
Charged. 5, but 3 got charged.
I don't remember exactly.
That's what I thought from my memory, but I could be wrong. I couldn't remember how many total. I just remembered the 3 that got charged, which is why I cited 3 at the beginning of the episode. But is there anything else you guys want to talk about? And we should. I really do want to talk about other cases in the future. I would like to talk about the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case. I'd like to talk about the Kyle Rittenhouse case. I think the civilian, like, what are they? What would you call them? Like a
activist?
Vigilantes?
Yeah, could be.
Because they think that they're like
protecting the community or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But they're criminals.
Exactly. Murderers.
We should get into that eventually.
I think those are good topics. I think, to do a little bit of a different thing so it's not always conspiracy necessarily. But look at some of the older cases that are kind of interesting. A lot of people, I've seen a lot of articles about Natalie Wood's death and how she died. And that may be something that might be interesting too.
It's come up twice now. So I think we have to do that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do the Kennedy one that you had cited before too.
Yeah. There's a couple of those. I mean, obviously JFK's assassination, but the other one, which was Ted Kennedy
I was talking about
and Chappaquiddick.
Yes, that's the one.
That one I think would be really interesting.
Yep. Yeah, we'll look into a bunch. And if you have any suggestions for cases that we should look into, reach out to us. BTV, well, I guess first, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a comment, give us a rating. We need more honest ratings. We have all 5 stars right now. I know we don't have a ton of ratings, but it's okay. You can give us a 1 star. Be critical.
What?
We want to get better. Whatever. I don't care. You need a mix. Stuff You Should Know has so many 1 stars, and it's the most listened to podcast of all time. Josh and Chuck, you guys do a great job, especially Josh.
Well, I think we do a great job. So we just need to hear what people want us to talk about. What cases do you want to hear us really spar on? I mean, I think it's kind of fun when we fight back and forth.
Yeah, we would be happy to spar more, give suggestions. You guys actually have given suggestions, and we need to start taking some more. That's on me. I'm sorry.
And what I really liked about that is Christine and I both looked at you at the same time, fighting with you.
Whatever. It's 2-on-1. I can handle that.
So he says.
Time will tell. Pause. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.